The first sign of trouble wasn't a letter, or a fine, or even a passive-aggressive note taped to the door. It was the silence. For 15 years, the half-acre of woods behind my house had been a symphony of crickets, rustling leaves, and the occasional hoot of an owl. It was the reason my wife Sarah and I had bought the place. It was a buffer, a slice of wildness that separated our quiet life from the neat, looping streets of the Briarwood Estates subdivision that had sprung up 5 years after we moved in. Then, one Tuesday, the silence came, punctuated by the angry buzz of a chainsaw. I was a land surveyor, semi-retired, but still taking on small jobs to keep my mind sharp. My entire professional life had been dedicated to the elegant certainty of lines on a map, of meets and bounds, of iron pins driven into the earth to declare, with unimpeachable authority, this ends here and that begins there. I believed in boundaries. They were the quiet, invisible agreements that allowed civilization to function. My property line, which I had surveyed myself a dozen times over the years just for the pleasure of it, ran a clean 100 feet into that patch of woods. The trees they were cutting were not on my land, but their sudden absence felt like a violation, a tearing of the fabric that made our home a sanctuary. I walked out to the edge of my lawn, where the manicured grass gave way to the rougher forest floor. Through the newly created gaps in the canopy, I could see 2 men in orange vests feeding branches into a chipper, and standing there, arms crossed, watching with an air of profound satisfaction, was Carol Jenkins. Carol was the newly elected president of the Briarwood Estates Homeowners Association. She had moved in about 3 years prior and had ascended through the HOA ranks with the speed and subtlety of a bulldozer. Before her, the HOA was a sleepy, informal thing. We paid a modest $200 a year for the upkeep of the front entrance sign and some seasonal flower planting. Most of us, myself included, didn't even live within the technical bounds of the HOA, but we chipped in as a gesture of goodwill. It was a neighborhood fund, really. Under Carol, it had morphed into something else entirely. It had become a quasi-governmental body with her, as its unwavering, unsmiling monarch. I walked toward her, keeping to my side of the invisible line I knew was there. "Morning, Carol," I said, my voice calm. She turned, her smile tight and thin. "Arthur? Beautiful day, isn't it? We're finally clearing out this dreadful overgrowth. It's a fire hazard, you know, and it attracts vermin." The vermin she referred to were, as far as I could tell, squirrels and the occasional deer family. "This is part of the Greenbelt, isn't it? I thought it was protected." "The board has re-evaluated the designation," she said, the words sounding rehearsed. "It's been deemed unmanaged common space, and we're taking steps to beautify it for the good of the community." There was that word, community. In Carol's mouth, it wasn't a word of inclusion. It was a cudgel. It meant her vision, her rules, her way. Anything that didn't fit was a threat to the community. "Well, it's a shame to see the old oaks go," I said, gesturing to a massive gnarled tree that was now heartbreakingly alone. "Progress requires sacrifice, Arthur," she said, turning back to the work crew as if I'd been dismissed. I stood there for another minute, the roar of the chipper grinding in my ears. It felt personal. That little patch of woods had been the view from our kitchen window for a decade and a half. Now, the view would be the back of the Miller's vinyl-sided house. I retreated to my own property, a knot of unease tightening in my stomach. The boundary was still there, a line of legal certainty, but it felt like it had been breached all the same. The clearing of the woods was just the beginning. The notices started a week later. They were tucked under our welcome mat, printed on crisp, cream-colored letterhead, with the Briarwood Estates HOA logo embossed at the top. The first one was about our mailbox. It was a sturdy forest green box I had installed myself when we first moved in. According to Bylaw 7, Section C, Paragraph 2, all mailboxes were to be uniform, black on a single black post, of a pre-approved model. We were given 30 days to comply. I read it and chuckled, tossing it on the counter. "Can you believe this?" I said to Sarah. She read it, her brow furrowing. "Are we even in the HOA, Art? I thought we just contributed." "We're not," I said with confidence. "Our lot was subdivided from the old Henderson farm 10 years before Briarwood was even a blueprint. We're not legally part of the association." "Then why are they sending us this?" "Because Carol is on a power trip," I said, dismissing it. "I'll just ignore it. What's she going to do?" That was my mistake. I underestimated the relentless energy of a person who has discovered the intoxicating power of petty tyranny. 2 weeks later, another letter arrived. This one was about the small vegetable garden Sarah tended with loving care in our side yard. It was apparently in violation of Bylaw 11, which prohibited agricultural cultivation visible from the street. The letter helpfully suggested we replace it with approved ornamental shrubbery. This one stung. Sarah's garden was her pride and joy. Her tomatoes were legendary. She'd spend hours out there in the summer, weeding and watering, coming in with a basket of fresh vegetables and dirt under her fingernails. "She can't do this," Sarah said, her voice trembling slightly. "This is our yard." "I know, honey. Don't worry about it." But I was worried. I was a man who preferred peace. My whole life was about avoiding conflict through the establishment of clear, undeniable facts. I resolved to go to the next HOA meeting. I would simply and calmly explain the situation. I would bring my deed, my survey plat. I would appeal to their reason. The meeting was held in the community clubhouse, a sterile beige room that smelled of air freshener and simmering resentment. About 20 people were there, most of them looking either bored or anxious. Carol sat at the head of a long folding table, flanked by a nervous-looking treasurer and a secretary who typed every word with furious intensity. When the floor was opened for new business, I stood up. "Arthur Mills, 1240. Henderson Lane," I said. "I just have a quick point of clarification. I've been receiving some violation notices recently, and I think there's been a misunderstanding. My property isn't actually part of the Briarwood Estates HOA." A murmur went through the room. Carol's expression didn't change. She steepled her fingers and looked at me over them. "Mr. Mills, we're all part of this community. We all have a responsibility to uphold the standards that protect our property values." "I understand that, Carol," I said, keeping my tone even. "I'm just talking about the legal reality. My lot was never incorporated into the development's plat. I have the documents to prove it. I'm happy to show them to the board." "That won't be necessary," she said smoothly. "Our records, which have been reviewed by our legal counsel, indicate that all properties adjacent to the Briarwood development are subject to its covenants. It's a matter of maintaining a consistent aesthetic. I'm sure you understand." I didn't understand. It was legal nonsense. There's no such thing as adjacent jurisdiction in property law. You're either in or you're out. The lines are absolute. "With all due respect, that's not how property law works," I said, a little more firmly this time. "The CC and RS have to be attached to the deed. Mine are not. My property is legally distinct." Carol's smile vanished. "Are you a lawyer, Arthur?" "No," I said. "I'm a surveyor. I know what a legal description is. I know what a plat map is." "Well, our lawyer disagrees with your assessment," she said, her voice turning to ice. "And the board stands with our counsel. The violations stand. If you refuse to comply, fines will be assessed. Next item." She looked away, pointedly ignoring my still raised hand. I sat down, my face hot with anger and frustration. I had come with facts, with reason. I was met with a brick wall of willful ignorance and condescension. A man a few rows ahead, a quiet fellow named Dave, who'd had a run-in with Carol over the color of his kid's playset, gave me a sympathetic look. No one else met my eye. They were afraid of her. I went home defeated. "How did it go?" Sarah asked. "It didn't," I grumbled, slumping into a kitchen chair. "She basically told me the law doesn't matter because her lawyer says so. So what do we do?" "We keep ignoring them," I said, though my conviction was wavering. "The fines are unenforceable if we're not in the HOA. It's just paper." For the next year, the paper kept coming. A fine for the mailbox, $50. A fine for the garden, $100. A fine for failure to remediate the mailbox violation. Another $50. Then they got creative. A notice that our trash cans were visible from the street for 3 hours past the designated collection time. A $25 fine. A violation for a small crack in our driveway. A $200 fine and a demand for immediate repair. Each letter was more strident than the last, citing bylaws and threatening further action. We did our best to live with it. It was a constant low-grade hum of anxiety in the background of our lives. Every time I walked to the mailbox, my stomach clenched a little. Sarah stopped enjoying her garden as much, always casting a nervous glance toward the street. We were being harassed, slowly and methodically. We talked to a lawyer, a friend of a friend, who listened patiently and said we had a solid case, but that fighting an HOA, even one that was in the wrong, could be a long and expensive process. He advised us to send a cease and desist letter. We did. It was a formal 2-page document drafted by the lawyer, citing the relevant property laws and demanding the HOA stop all communication and harassment. We sent it via certified mail. The response was a letter from the HOA's lawyer. It was smug and dismissive. It stated in no uncertain terms that they rejected our position and would pursue all available remedies to ensure compliance for the betterment of the community. The letters and fines continued, now with an added legal processing fee tacked onto each one. We felt trapped. Moving wasn't an option. This was our home. We had paid it off years ago. It was where we had planned to live out our retirement. But the peace we had cherished was gone, replaced by a siege mentality. Carol had managed to poison our sanctuary. I saw her sometimes when I was out getting the mail, watching me from her perfectly manicured lawn across the street, a little smirk on her face. She was enjoying it. I started documenting everything. I bought a binder and clear plastic sleeves. Every notice, every letter, every photograph I took of our violations went into it. The binder grew thick. It felt like I was compiling evidence for a trial I didn't know how to start. The total amount of the fines crept past $1,000, then $2,000, then $5,000. It was monopoly money, I told myself. It wasn't real. Then the certified letter came. It was different from the others. The envelope was thicker, heavier. It required a signature. The mail carrier gave me a pitying look as I signed for it. I took it inside and set it on the kitchen table, staring at the return address. Law Offices of Pike & Associates on behalf of the Briarwood Estates HOA. "What is it?" Sarah asked, coming in from the living room. "I don't know," I said. "But it's not good." My hands trembled slightly as I slid it open. Inside was a stack of papers, stapled together. The cover sheet was a demand letter. It was a detailed, itemized invoice of every fine, every late fee, every penalty that had been assessed against us for the past 18 months. They had compounded the interest. They had added administrative fees. They had billed us for every letter their lawyer had written. I scanned down the long column of figures, my heart pounding against my ribs. My eyes landed on the final number at the bottom of the page. It was printed in bold. Total amount. Due. $47,382.50. I read it again. And again. The number didn't make sense. It was a fantasy figure, an absurdity. $47,000 for a green mailbox and a vegetable garden. The letter went on to state that if the full amount was not paid within 30 days, the HOA would be placing a lien on our property and would immediately begin foreclosure proceedings. I felt the blood drain from my face. The room seemed to tilt. This wasn't a game anymore. This wasn't a matter of ignoring paper tigers. This was a direct, credible threat to take our home. Our paid-for, beloved home. "Art? Arthur? What is it?" Sarah's voice was sharp with alarm. I couldn't speak. I just slid the letter across the table to her. I watched her face as she read it, saw her eyes widen in disbelief, then her hand fly to her mouth. She sank into a chair, the color gone from her cheeks. "They can't," she whispered. "They can't do this." But the letter said they could, and they would. For the first time in this whole ordeal, I felt a surge of pure, cold rage. It was a feeling I hadn't experienced in years. It burned away the frustration, the anxiety, the sense of helplessness. Carol Jenkins wasn't just a petty tyrant anymore. She had crossed a line. She had threatened my home, my wife, my life's work. She had declared war, and I, a quiet man who believed in the simple, peaceful truth of lines on a map, was going to finish it. I looked at Sarah, at the fear in her eyes. "Don't you worry," I said, my voice lower and harder than she had ever heard it. "This ends now." The binder of evidence was a good start, but it was purely defensive. It was my word against theirs, my lawyer's interpretation against their lawyers. To win, I couldn't just prove I was right. I had to prove, in a way that was public, irrefutable, and utterly humiliating, that Carol was wrong. I had to dismantle her authority at its very foundation. My surveyor's mind, the part of me that had lain dormant through all the passive resistance, kicked into high gear. For years, my job had been to find the truth buried under layers of conflicting claims, old deeds, and faded maps. I would do the same thing here. I wasn't just going to defend my property line, I was going to survey the entire rotten structure of Carol's little kingdom. I spent the next 2 days in my home office, surrounded by the tools of my trade. I pulled out my own property file first, the original deed, dated 1992, the survey plat from the subdivision of the Henderson farm, recorded in the county courthouse. The lines were clear, the legal description precise. It described a parcel of land whose boundaries were defined by iron pins and distances, with no mention of any homeowners association, existing or future. This was my bedrock. Next, I needed to know everything about Briarwood Estates. I drove down to the county records office, a place I knew as well as my own workshop. It was a dusty, quiet building, filled with the scent of old paper and binding glue. I greeted the county clerk, a woman named Martha, whom I'd known for 30 years. "Long time no see, Arthur," she said, peering over her glasses. "What kind of trouble are you digging up today?" "The worst kind, Martha," I said with a grim smile. "HOA trouble," she winced in sympathy. "Say no more. What do you need?" "Everything you have on the Briarwood Estates subdivision, the master plat, the CC&Rs, the articles of incorporation for the HOA. She nodded and pointed me toward the large leather-bound plat books. "It'll be in here, volume 18, I think. Let me know if you need help with the microfiche for the covenants." For the next 6 hours, I was in my element. I carefully unrolled the huge vellum sheet that was the master plat of Briarwood Estates. It was a beautiful piece of drafting. Every lot, every street, every utility easement was laid out with perfect precision. I found my own property on the edge of the map. It was clearly depicted, a rectangle of land labeled Lot 4, Henderson Farm Sub. And just as I had always known, the thick, solid boundary line that delineated the legal extent of Briarwood Estates ran along my property line, not around it. My land was adjacent, but it was explicitly, graphically outside. This was my smoking gun, the core of my defense. But it wasn't enough. I needed to understand how Carol had built her power base. I moved to the microfiche reader and scrolled through the HOA's founding documents. The covenants, conditions, and restrictions were a dense 50-page document of legalese. I read every word. The section defining the properties subject to the covenants listed every single lot number within the Briarwood plat. Lot 1 through 152. My property was not on the list, so their entire claim was based on a lie their lawyer had either failed to check or had willingly propagated. But how were they getting away with it? How had they amassed so much power and so much money that they could threaten people with foreclosure? That led me to my next step. The HOA was a registered non-profit corporation in the state. That meant its financial records were, to a certain extent, public. I filed a formal public records request for the last 3 years of the Briarwood Estates HOA's annual budgets, expense reports, and meeting minutes. While I waited for that to be processed, I did something I should have done a year earlier. I started talking to my neighbors, not just the ones in Briarwood, but the other 2 houses on Henderson Lane that were, like mine, outside the official subdivision. An elderly couple, the Gables, lived in one. They told me they received the notices too, but they were renters and just passed them on to their landlord, who lived out of state. They had no idea if he was paying the fines. The other house belonged to a young family, the Potters. They had moved in 6 months ago. Mrs. Potter answered the door, a baby on her hip. When I explained who I was, her face clouded over. "The HOA," she said, her voice dropping. "We got a welcome basket from them. And then, a week later, a violation notice because our basketball hoop was the wrong color." "Did you pay it?" I asked. She nodded, looking embarrassed. "It was only $50. We're new here. We didn't want to make waves." "You do know your property isn't legally in the HOA, right?" Her eyes went wide. "What?" "The realtor told us it was. It was part of the disclosure." My blood ran cold. The rot was deeper than I thought. They weren't just harassing people. They were misrepresenting the legal status of properties to new buyers. This was fraud. A week later, a thick manila envelope arrived from the State Corporations Commission. It was the HOA's financial disclosures. I spread the documents out on my dining room table, armed with a legal pad and a calculator. Sarah brought me a cup of coffee. "Finding anything?" she asked. "I don't know yet," I said, "but it feels like I'm about to." The budget was surprisingly large. The annual dues of $400 from 152 homes should have brought in about $60,800 a year, but the HOA's reported income was over $100,000. The difference was made up of fines, fees, and special assessments. Carol was running a significant portion of her budget on penalties. It was a revenue stream built on intimidation. Then I looked at the expenses. The numbers were staggering. Landscaping, $50,000 a year. Legal fees, $30,000. Community improvements, a vague category that accounted for another $20,000. The landscaping fee jumped out at me. $50,000 to mow a few common areas and trim the bushes at the entrance seemed exorbitant. I looked at the vendor listed on the expense report, Evergreen Solutions, LLC. The name meant nothing to me, but in the age of the internet, no name is a mystery for long. A quick search of the state business registry gave me the name of the registered agent for Evergreen Solutions. It was a man named Frank Miller. A more specific search on social media gave me what I was looking for. Frank Miller's sister was a woman named Carol Jenkins. She was paying her brother's company $50,000 a year in resident-funded dues. I cross-referenced the address of his company. It was a residential house, his house. There was no evidence he had any other employees or any other clients. It was a shell company set up to funnel money from the HOA directly into her family's pockets. This was the key. This was the whole story. The power, the control, the relentless enforcement of petty rules. It wasn't about property values or community standards. It was about money. The more fines she levied, the more she could justify budget increases, the more she could skim off the top through inflated no-bid contracts with her brother. My refusal to comply wasn't just an insult to her authority. It was a threat to her illegal income stream. The $47,000 demand wasn't just a threat. It was an act of desperation. She needed to make an example of me, to crush any dissent, to show everyone the cost of defying her. If she could take my house, no one would ever dare question a fine for a basketball hoop again. I now had a complete picture. I had the legal proof of my exclusion from the HOA. I had evidence of fraud in real estate disclosures, and I had a clear trail of financial malfeasance, nepotism, and embezzlement. The 30-day deadline on the demand letter was ticking down. I had about a week left. I could have hired a lawyer and let him handle it. We could have filed a lawsuit. But that would have been a quiet, private victory. The damage Carol had done was public. The humiliation she had inflicted was public. Her downfall, I decided, needed to be public as well. I spent an evening carefully assembling my evidence into a neat, undeniable package. I made certified copies of the Briarwood plat map and the CC and RS from the county office. I printed out the articles of incorporation for the HOA and for Evergreen Solutions. I printed the screenshots of social media posts connecting Carol to her brother. I created a spreadsheet that clearly showed the flow of money. Then I sat down at my computer. The demand letter had come from the HOA's lawyer, a man named Mr. Pike. He was the instrument of her threats, so he would be the recipient of my response. I would not engage in a lengthy argument. I would not present my evidence. I would not make threats of my own. My professional life had taught me the power of a single, unassailable statement of fact. I opened a new document and typed a single sentence. It was addressed to Mr. Pike, the HOA Board of Directors, and copied to every single homeowner in Briarwood Estates for whom I could find an address. I had their addresses from the public tax rolls. Then I drove to the post office and sent over 150 letters. The most important one, the one to the lawyer, I sent via certified mail, return receipt requested. The trap was set. Now, all I had to do was wait for the animal to walk into it. The week that followed was one of the most nerve-wracking of my life. The silence that descended was different from the one that had started this whole affair. This was a tense, expectant quiet. I imagined my letter arriving in mailboxes all over the neighborhood. I pictured people reading it, the confusion, the dawning curiosity. I imagined it landing on Mr. Pike's desk, the brief moment of puzzlement before he called Carol, and I imagined Carol's fury. My one-sentence response had been devastatingly simple. It read, "My property, legally described as Lot 4, Block 7 of the Henderson Farm subdivision, is not, and has never been, subject to the covenants, conditions, and restrictions of the Briarwood Estates Homeowners Association." That was it. No argument, no emotion, no legal threats. Just a cold, hard statement of fact, delivered with the finality of a surveyor's pin driven into bedrock. It didn't accuse them of anything. It simply stated a truth that invalidated their every action against me. It was a response designed to create chaos, to make everyone ask one simple question. Is this true? Because if it was true for me, who else might it be true for? And if it was true, what did that say about the leadership of the HOA? On the fifth day, the official response came. It was a notice delivered to every house in the subdivision announcing an emergency community meeting. The agenda was vague: to discuss urgent legal matters and ensure the continued financial stability of our association. It was scheduled for the following Thursday evening at the clubhouse. "This is it," I said to Sarah, holding the notice. "She's taking the bait." "Are you sure you want to do this, Art?" she asked, her hand on my arm. "It's going to be ugly." "It's already ugly," I said. "The only difference is, tonight, the ugliness won't be directed at us." We walked into the clubhouse on Thursday evening, to a room crackling with tension. It was packed. Nearly every homeowner was there, a far cry from the usual sparse attendance. They were clustered in small groups, whispering, clutching copies of my letter and the meeting notice. I saw Dave, the man with the playset, give me a small, nervous nod. I saw the Potters, the young family, looking lost and anxious. Carol was at the front table, a rigid smile plastered on her face. Mr. Pike, the lawyer, was sitting beside her, looking deeply uncomfortable. He was a man in an expensive suit who had clearly been dragged into a small-town spat that had spiraled out of his control. Carol banged a gavel on the table. "Let's come to order," she said, her voice overly bright. "Thank you all for coming on such short notice. I know there have been some rumors and some misinformation circulated recently. We're here tonight to clear the air and present the facts." She launched into a 20-minute speech about the importance of community, the tireless work of the board, and the dangers posed by a few dissident elements who wish to enjoy the benefits of our beautiful neighborhood without contributing their fair share. She never mentioned my name, but her eyes kept flicking in my direction. It was a masterclass in passive aggression and veiled threats. "These dissident individuals," she continued, her voice rising, "have chosen to attack the very foundation of our association with baseless claims and legal trickery. They seek to undermine the rules that protect our property values for their own selfish benefit. But I am here to tell you that this board will not be intimidated. We have consulted with our legal counsel, Mr. Pike, and we are proceeding with all necessary actions to collect the significant delinquent funds owed to this community." She finished to scattered, uncertain applause. She then opened the floor to questions, a confident smirk on her face. She thought she had controlled the narrative. I let the silence hang for a moment, then I slowly stood up. A hush fell over the room. Every eye was on me. I held a single slim manila folder in my hand. "Arthur Mills, 1240 Henderson Lane," I said, my voice calm and steady. "Carol, you mentioned presenting the facts. I'd like to do that. Could you please use the projector to display the official, recorded master plat for the Briarwood Estates subdivision?" Carol froze. Her smile faltered. We don't have that with us. It's not relevant." "Oh, I think it's the only thing that's relevant," I said. "But not to worry. I have a certified copy right here." I walked to the front of the room. The secretary, flustered, moved aside as I placed a transparency of the plat map on the overhead projector. The map of the subdivision filled the screen behind Carol. I picked up a laser pointer. "This," I said, circling the entire subdivision, "is Briarwood Estates, as defined by the legal document that created it. And this," I said, the red dot landing on the rectangle of my property, "is Lot 4 of the Henderson Farm subdivision. As you can all plainly see, my property lies outside the legal boundary of the HOA. It is not, and has never been, a part of this association." A wave of murmurs swept through the room. People were leaning forward, squinting at the screen. The evidence was not a matter of opinion or interpretation. It was a line on a map. "This is a misrepresentation," Carol sputtered. "Our documents—" "Your documents are wrong," I said, cutting her off. I replaced the map with a transparency of the first page of the C, and RS. "This is the controlling legal document for your HOA. It lists every single property subject to its rules. My property is not on that list. Therefore, You have no legal authority over me. Not for my mailbox, not for my garden, and certainly not for the $47,000 you are fraudulently trying to extort from my family." The word extort landed like a physical blow. The room erupted. Carol was pale, her composure shattering. "Mr. Pike, tell them," she pleaded. The lawyer stood up, adjusted his tie, and cleared his throat. "While there may be some ambiguity in the historical paperwork—" "There is no ambiguity," I said, my voice like steel. "There is only the law, and you, sir, as an officer of the court, know that. You sent a demand for $47,000 and threatened to foreclose on a property over which your client has zero jurisdiction. That's not just sloppy work, that's professional malpractice." Pike's face went white. He sat down heavily without another word. But I wasn't finished. "Now, let's talk about why," I said, turning back to the stunned audience. "You might be wondering why Mrs. Jenkins is so obsessed with enforcing rules on people she has no authority over. You might be wondering where all your money goes." I put up my last transparency. It was the spreadsheet I had created, showing the landscaping contract. "This year, you are all paying $50,000 for landscaping services to a company called Evergreen Solutions. I'm curious, Carol, could you please tell the community what your relationship is to the owner of that company, Mr. Frank Miller?" Complete dead silence. Carol stared at me, her mouth opening and closing like a fish. Her face was a mask of pure hatred. "I will not be slandered," she shrieked. "It's not slander if it's true," I said quietly. "He's your brother, isn't he? And your board has been awarding him a no-bid contract for an inflated price for the last 3 years. You're not protecting property values. You're enriching your family with your neighbor's money." That was it. The dam broke. The treasurer of the board, a timid man I'd seen at the meetings, stood up and shouted, "I never approved that contract. She told me it was vetted." Dave, the playset owner, stood up. "And what about the special assessment for the front entrance? Where did that money go?" The room dissolved into chaos. People were yelling, pointing fingers. The board members were shouting at each other. Carol was screaming for order, but no one was listening. Her authority, so absolute just minutes before, had evaporated. She was no longer a monarch. She was just a cornered woman in a beige room, exposed as a bully, a liar, and a thief. Sarah and I slipped out the back in the confusion. We walked home in the cool night air, the angry shouts from the clubhouse fading behind us. We didn't say a word. When we got to our front porch, we stood for a moment and looked at our house. The porch light cast a warm, welcoming glow. The forest green mailbox stood proudly by the curb. In the side yard, the moonlight silvered the leaves of Sarah's tomato plants. It was quiet. Not the tense, expectant quiet of the past week, or the violated silence from when they cut the trees. It was a deep, peaceful quiet. The kind we had moved here for. The kind that meant home. The aftermath was swift and brutal. The HOA board resigned en masse the next day. An emergency election was held, and a new chastened board was voted in. Their first official act was to send a formal letter of apology to us, the Potters, and several other families Carol had targeted, nullifying all fines and violations. An anonymous tip, complete with meticulously organized financial documents, was sent to the state attorney general's office. A formal investigation was launched into the financial dealings of the previous HOA board. I heard through the grapevine that Mr. Pike's law firm dropped the HOA as a client and was facing a bar association inquiry. 2 weeks after the meeting, a moving truck pulled up to Carol Jenkins' house in the dead of night. By morning, they were gone. There was no for sale sign, no farewells. They just vanished. Life returned to a new kind of normal, a better normal. The neighborhood felt lighter, friendlier. People started talking to each other again. Dave painted his kid's playset a brilliant, unapproved shade of blue, and everyone who walked by smiled. The Potters put their basketball hoop back up. One Saturday morning, I was out in the yard, repairing a loose board on the porch steps. Sarah was in her garden, humming to herself. I looked out at our property, at the clear, invisible lines that defined it. For so long, I had taken their power for granted. I had assumed that their truth was self-evident, but I had learned that a line on a map is only as strong as the person willing to defend it. I hadn't wanted the fight. I was a man of peace, of quiet certainties. But Carol Jenkins had forced me to become something else. She had forced me to take the tools of my trade, precision, research, and an unwavering belief in the facts, and use them not just to define a piece of land, but to reclaim a piece of my life. The breeze rustled the leaves of the old oaks that still stood at the edge of the woods. The world inside my property lines was peaceful once more, and I, Arthur Mills, a semi-retired surveyor, had learned the profound satisfaction of not just knowing where the line was, but of holding it.